Sup guys, we're the Hip Hop Society committee and we're here at Thekla to interview Akala on his Knowledge is Power tour. Enjoy!
The art of rapping, rhythmically rhyming over the beat of a drum, is absolutely not American. And human beings have been doing that, particularly African human beings, for hundreds of years as a means of recording culture, going back to the griots of the major empires of Western Africa, Mali, Songhai, Gao, etc. This was kind of a central part of traditions throughout Africa, which was obviously brought to the Americas and manifested in various different ways. Even in America, we can go back to the 30s and the 20s and people like the Golden Gate Quartet, who were already rapping back then. So there's this sort of mythology around that the rap industry has created. That all of a sudden in the 1970s, these guys in the Bronx suddenly invented this thing that was really new. And we talk about 30 years of hip hop or 30 years of rap, which is completely absurd. It's like talking about 50 years of martial arts, because Bruce Lee was born in America. Of course, before Bruce Lee arrived in America, there's this whole long period of Chinese culture that gives us the martial arts that he brought. This is the same for Africans in America. They didn't come to America culturally empty-handed, and a lot of the narrative, without explicitly saying that, assumes that, whether intentional or not. So, understanding the culture in that way, I don't even see necessarily. There may be stylistic variations, but Damian Marley's a rapper. In fact, he's one of the best rappers in the world. But because he has a Jamaican accent, he's not included in the dialogue of who's the best MC. This is totally, even amongst black communities in the Americas, Black America sees itself as the definitive black community in America. Therefore, Damian Marley, who comes from Jamaica, even though Jamaica had such a major influence on the evolution of hip-hop in New York, can be excluded from the conversation of great rappers, just by virtue of not having an American accent. Does that make sense? And so, coming back to a UK perspective, yeah, there's a unique set of influences being on this island as opposed to somewhere else, but the cultural base of what we do is the same. I didn't learn to rap watching MTV like a lot of people from outside my community did. There's no diss to that, but I grew up in African Caribbean culture of which rapping was a part. My dad was a DJ, my stepdad was a DJ, I was on floats at Carnival as a kid, I went to Night Empire Theatre. This was my culture. It's only years later, as I got older, I started to see what was the culture that I was part of become on the mainstream TV, if that makes sense. And many of the guys even you talk about that we say are American are immigrants from the Caribbean anyway, whether we're talking about KRS-One, Africa Bambaataa, Cool, DJ Herc, Lauryn Hill, Wycliffe, Gil Scott-Heron's dad was from Jamaica. I mean, the list of African American hip-hop artists, Slick Rick, Biggie, who them or their parents weren't even born in America, is quite interesting. But yet still the culture has been so Americanized. The UK music industry, the internet's changed things in a big way. It's made it more possible to be heard now as an artist. It's also meant that everybody thinks they're an artist, and everybody thinks they're a rapper particularly, which sort of is the case across music generally, which devalues the art of music. It's one of these things. It's not like architecture. Not everyone thinks they can be an architect. You got to train to be an architect. Well, you got to train to be a good musician too. But this kind of pop culture makes us think that we don't. But I think the internet's just made it much more easier to have a career as an independent artist, and that's one of the great things about the way it's done. Well, I suppose they say, there's always quote-unquote political music in a time of austerity, but I mean, that's not reflected in the mainstream. 20 years ago, when you had Rage Against the Machine and Public Enemy and people like that, perhaps coming out of the American kind of Reaganomics era, even here with, Oasis and people like that. But, I don't know, I think there's always been music with a quote-unquote social content. The current political climate, has it seen a noticeable change in people wanting to hear this kind of music? I'm not sure. I reject the term conscious rapper or political rapper because it assumes that if I were rapping about Gucci shoes, Italian clothes, German cars and French champagne, as I always say to people, that wouldn't be political. Of course it would. If I'm rapping about, and I'm particularly as a young African Caribbean male, if I'm rapping about my humanity is only valuable if I can attain all these things owned by rich white people. It's very political. I'm reinforcing the doctrines of white supremacy, I'm reinforcing the doctrines of capitalism, I'm reinforcing the doctrines of Europe's right to govern the world. But all of that is seen as apolitical because that is the political agenda of the governing elite. So if you reinforce the agenda of the governing elite, that's apolitical. If you do anything against it, you now become a political rapper. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so there's no stigma attached to people doing it. You know, if I rap about an Uzi, well, where's an Uzi made? An Uzi's made in Israel. It's not made in Harlem or Brooklyn. So I'm advertising for arms manufacturers when I rap about my Uzi or my Glock 9 or my Desert Eagle, none of which are made by people that look like you. So if I look like you and I'm doing that, that's very political. And so yeah, political rappers definitely have a space. They have all the space because all of commercial rap is political. Well, I don't really care about people that think that, to be honest. I'm not really bothered. They're the kind of people that want to believe what they want to believe. As if society isn't misogynistic, as if sexism is just not a problem in the world, but it's just a problem in hip hop. As if, you know, violence is not a problem in the world. We don't invade countries and murder thousands and millions of people. We don't invent nuclear bombs, but rappers do all of that. You know, there's this space called rap in which all of the bad stuff in the world happens. It's quite hilarious, especially when it comes from people who, you know, support unjust, illegal wars. When it comes from governments that have a long history of imperialism and rape and murder, it kind of starts to sound really comical. The idea that people rhyming are causing these problems. I'm not saying rappers don't have responsibility, but the idea that rap is where the problem started is quite hilarious to me. Well, it depends what you define as commercial success. I say this to people all the time. The funny thing is like I said, the internet has made it possible to have a career in a way that it wasn't 10 or 20 years ago. You know, I got a new passport a couple of weeks ago, so I've only had it for 3 years. I run out of pages to get stamps. So because I don't go around talking about the fact that I do have a nice car, I live in a nice house, I've flown all over the world in the last 4 years, there's a perception that you're not successful. There's many artists who are on TV way more than I am, who haven't been to 60 countries or whatever. I've lost count, I've genuinely lost count of how many countries I've been to in the last 5 or 6 years that I've been paid to go to. So the absurdity of it is that I am probably more commercially successful than artists that look more commercially successful than me. Not all of them. I'm not saying I'm a millionaire, because I'm saying that my life's fine. So even in a success sense, I feel successful. I wake up every day and I do what I want. To me, that's success. But if you're talking about, you know, selling millions of units, being on billboards and singing about Gucci and champagne, no, that's not high on my personal agenda. But being able to touch people's lives, I think, is more important, and it has more longevity. I haven't been on the radio, commercial radio, since 2006. I've had 5 UK tours since then. There's some artists, they drop off the radio for 5 minutes and they won't be able to sell 10 tickets. So it's very interesting to me. People don't understand the difference between a fan base and hype, a career and a buzz. Currently the biggest influence on my music, life. But if I had to pick a musician, there's a plethora of people, from Wu-Tang to Bob Marley to Public Enemy to Ella Fitzgerald to James Brown to Led Zeppelin. Even though they stole a bunch of songs, I still think they're an incredible band. I just wish they'd give them credit. At the moment I'm listening to a really good album by an artist called Nicholas Jar. It's called Spaces Only Noise. Really fucking good album.
Nice, very much.
No problem at all. Anytime. We got. Yes, sir. We got. No problem. Anytime.